آه که دلم چه بیقرار شکست، دمی که حرمتم در افشار شکست. از خون دلم یادگار قاتلم نوشت و از شرم دیوار شکست. آتش زدن باغ را دیوان شب و بغض باغبان که این بار شکست. زخم برچه بر مهر مادری رسید، طفل وادیش آینه بار شکست. این بار شیرین خود را به چاه انداخت، غمی که دل هر برار شکست. تشکر میکنم از قاری عزیز جناب آقای کریمی و اکنون توجه شما را به مقاله که به زبان انگلیسی است توسط خواهر محترمایمان شکوفه طاهری جلب می‌کنیم تا تشریف آوریشان به روح رهبر بزرگ و شهدای افشار صلوات عنایت.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. 21 years ago from today, in a cold winter night, the silence of the night had pervaded everywhere. More than 5,000 families, unaware of what awaited them, had taken refuge in the warmth of their homes. A father, in hopes of tomorrow's sunrise, embracing his 9-month-old child. A mother cooking a meal for the family from what her husband had earned. And children rejoicing at the return of their father from a hard day of work. They were living, momentarily satisfied. Perhaps in those hours every home in Afshar lived in such a mood. Unbeknown to the innocent residents of Afshar that the bloodthirsty predators had their claws and teeth ready to spill their flesh and blood. Unaware, they were embarking on a cold winter night, expecting another sunrise to come and warm their souls. Alas, little did they know that a terrible night and a painful morning was awaiting them. In few moments, Afshar would be looted and under fire by human-looking beasts, ready to embark on an atrocious mission of turning these simple yet vulnerable lives into pieces, whose scars would leave a permanent damage and that lives would never be normal again. In few moments, Afshar wouldn't be Afshar anymore. That night, preparation and plans were being made by savages to give birth to a tragedy that history does not have it in its memory. A tragedy that tongue feels weak of retelling it. The darkness and the silence of the night dominated the horizon. But suddenly the calm and peacefulness in Afshar was swept forever. Panic and fright overtook all of the Afshar. At 1 o'clock on the morning of 11th of February, while the inhabitants of Afshar lay asleep in their beds, they were attacked. The defenseless Afsharians people were under a barrage of artillery fire. That a peaceful night was turned into a hell on earth. The smell of gunpowder, human flesh, blood and hair had fragranted the air in Afshar that night. The sounds of artillery, screams or mourning of frightened and agonized children and women were echoed from every corner of Afshar. Afshar was on fire and ruins. 21 years ago today, as the sun rose, the human predators had begun their other phase of atrocity against the thousands of women, children, men, and the elderly. These human predators did not even have a mercy upon a 9-month-old child. Indeed, they ripped them apart. Countless people were injured. Many were displaced. Countless women were taken hostage and their souls destroyed. Thousands have lost their loved ones' property and possession. People were destroyed. Houses were burned and pillaged. Streets where laughter of the children were heard the previous day was turned into a bloodbath. And all of these crimes occurred in the space of hours. Yet still today, Afshar sustains that wound. It still entails those painful events, memories, and terrible ordeal. Yet still, those wounds pounds the heart and shakes human soul. 3 days later, murdering of hundreds of innocent civilians, plundering of our houses and mosques was celebrated as a victory by the government of the time. This was not the first time that the vulnerable Hazara people were subjected to atrocity. Abdul Rahman massacred 62% of these people, and ever since thousands of others were looted, killed, and enslaved under successive regimes in Afghanistan. But Afshar was distinct in a sense that it entailed gruesomeness, savagery, and cruelty in the most profound way. Afshar is the most pressing historical text of the oppressed, and at the same time, the most compelling witness to the truth of this tragedy. Afshar is the doomsday that reconstructs the depth and is the authenticity and the entirety of a tragedy. None of us have the right to forgive the perpetrators under any circumstances. The question today is, 21 years later from the tragedy, have the criminals that gave effect to the tragedy been interrogated about their crimes? Have they been brought to justice? No, and no. 21 years later, the perpetrators of this crime is not ashamed nor regretful, but have their heads held high and occupy a major position in Afghanistan's government and are even presidential candidates for the upcoming elections, considering the atrocities in Afshar as their legitimate right. Their stay in the positions of power is a mockery of the blood of the victims. Afshar tragedy is one of the most ruthless of a catastrophe. Afshar is where humanity and humanity ends, and inhumanity and immorality begins. Afshar is where the power of comprehension and depiction ends, only to be taken over by a lasting pain. Afshar is a tragedy that ultimately encompasses the pain, suffering, and a tale of a vulnerable group of people, the Hazaras. But the child, the young girl, the mother, father, and grandparents whose blood was spilled in the most terrible way before being a Hazara or Shia were human, whose lives were sustained by blood flow in their bodies. This tragedy must be looked at from a humanistic perspective, devoid of any ethnic, religious, or sectarian divide, because only then human conscience will be able to see the scale of this atrocity. Unjustified war, destruction, and violence such as the Holocaust and the South African apartheid is part of human history. And people of our land also had the same experiences and woes. But our tragedy lies where we still have to face the repeat of a painful history today in Quetta, Behsud. In an age where there is an outcry for democracy, in an age where developed nations boast about being humanitarian, justice is not served. The very same criminals are promoted to be protectors, executors of law and order in Afghanistan. The very same criminals who beheaded around 40 children aged less than a year. The very same criminals who ordered to nail a baby to a wall by a rifle's bayonet are still roaming around freely. we must initiate and pressurize the International Criminal Court to bring these perpetrators to justice. Justice has to be served and the rule of law must be upheld. I'll end by reciting a poem by شهیدی in Farsi. دیوانه آتش خش نام دیگر ما، جز خون جوشان نیست در جام سر ما. دیوانگی منصور مردان آتش، دیوانگی رقصی است در طوفان آتش. دیوانگی رقصیدن سرخ است در خون، دیوانگی معراج ره تلخ مجنون. دیوانگی عصیان انسانهای در بند، دیوانگی خشم خداوند. دریا به دست موجهای خود اسیر است، دریا گرفتار جنونهای نصیر است. ما را زمین، ما را زمان دیوانه کرده، بیداد و زنجیرگران دیوانه کرده. دیوانه می سازد زمین را و زمان را زخم افشار. 40 دختران و جیل و تیغ و برچه و دار. دیوانه ایم از کودک سر بریده، از گیسوان دختری آتش کشیده. بگذار جای شعر از فریاد گوییم، ما پاره پاره شعله‌ور با قلب ریشیم. ما شاهد جان کندن اجداد خویشیم. در آستین دوستی ها مار دیدیم، بیداد را بر قوم خود بسیار دیدیم. آب از حسین و نان از این مردم گرفتن، از استخوان مردمان هضم گرفتن. تشکر.
الله